Welcome all. Thanks for coming on a Thursday afternoon. It's with great pleasure that we continue with the third conversation in the Hrant Foundation series, Ancestral Journeys, Reflections on Land and Belonging. In June, we had the great privilege of hosting Anahit Nazaryan, who shared her moving encounters in İncesu and Cücün, Kayseri. Later that month, we welcomed Caroline Rapkevyan, whose longer journey took her to Harput, Husenik, Germir, and Talas. Caroline has been devoted to collecting family stories and photographs for many years, weaving together fragments of memory across time and place. Through these ongoing conversations, we seek to explore what it means to reimagine the stories passed down from our grandparents, the memories of places they once called home, and the traces that continue to shape identity across generations. Today, we are honored to host Deborah Valoma, who has just returned from Elazığ, where she visited her ancestral land of her family. In 2 weeks, on the 27th of November, we will be hosting Paul Vartanskuyasyan. I hope we can see you there too. Now I would like to introduce Deborah to you. She's an artist, she's a writer, and she's a professor and professor emerita of the textiles and graduate fine arts programs at California College of the Arts in San Francisco. Her interdisciplinary work considers textiles through multiple theoretical lenses, including embodiment, materiality, ephemerality, and indigeneity. In addition to developing and teaching a comprehensive series of textile history and theory courses, Deborah has written articles and catalog essays, presented papers, and curated exhibitions on related topics. She published the book Scrape the Willow Until It Sings, which I'm very curious about, that traces the indigenous philosophies of practices of Julia Parker, the premier Native American basket weaver in California. Deborah is currently working on a multi-year interdisciplinary project that began when she inventoried a collection of 100 heirloom textiles inherited from her grandmother, most made by her foremothers in villages in Ottoman Turkey and the Armenian diaspora. A combination of research, archiving, and responsive making, this project addresses the role of textiles as signifiers of identity and agents of cultural continuity. The floor is yours. We are looking forward to listening to your experience.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction, and thank you for coming, everyone. This is a very raw subject for me. I just returned the day before yesterday. So it's not a great thing to start a lecture with apologies, but I'm going to do that now. First of all, my pronunciation of words will not be perfect. I keep practicing, but this is not my home language. Obviously, I do not speak Armenian or Turkish. And secondly, I'm feeling very raw and I probably will cry. So it's just a little bit of a warning. So my mother line comes from the Harput area, the villages Sinamud, Husenik, Mezre, and Hoke. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that one. My two great-grandfathers left before the massacres of 1895, but they lost family in that violence, including their parents, wives, and children. My two great-grandmothers survived those massacres, but also lost family members and fled in search of safety. After arriving in New York City, many of them lived in Boston, some in Chicago, but the family came to rest in California, where they grew grapes on the farmland that looked strikingly familiar to their homeland. It was something that I kept saying when we were in the area last week, and just in the last few days, how much it looked like the rolling brown hills of California. I grew up in Berkeley, California. I got my undergraduate degree in anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley, and I earned a master's degree in fine art with a specialty in textiles. My work is a hybrid of making, but also theory. And first and foremost, I consider myself a weaver, but I define that term more loosely than most. A weaver, in my opinion, is a networker, someone who forges dialogues between sets of threads, sets of people, and sets of ideas. My work, whether as an artist, researcher, writer, curator, or professor, focuses on textiles as vehicles of identity and cultural continuity. In 2013, I published a book, which was mentioned a minute ago, entitled Scrape the Willow Until It Sings. And it recounts the words and the work of the premier Native American basket weaver in California. She's now 96. But I spent 10 years collecting conversations with her. And the book is a hybrid of her oral history and words of theory and history, so that I can contextualize her work. She's very much a carrier of intangible cultural heritage within the Native American cultural reclamation movement, which is very strong in the United States right now. But I also wanted to position her work within the contemporary art arena. After inheriting a family collection of textiles, another multi-year project materialized, again focusing on textiles as vehicles of cultural survival, but this time my own. A combination of archiving, research, and responsive art making, the project addresses my family's experiences of the genocide and exile from their homelands. This is my great-grandmother. Her name was Margaret Vartaresian Sohigian. It was taken in 1907 in Harpert, and the photograph was sent to her prospective husband in Chicago. It was an arranged marriage. Like others, my ancestors carried very few objects as they fled their homeland, but many women held thread skill in their hands. Transferred from grandmother to mother to daughter as a signature of feminine virtue, needlecraft also gave women a creative voice. The most precious pieces in the collection date back more than 100 years. They were crafted in Ottoman Turkey, and somehow they were miraculously rescued from the chaos and the violence. Some of the pieces from what my family called the old country, which is here, are museum quality. You can see that from the images. For instance, this embroidery was made by orphan Armenian girls, likely in the early 20s, in Syria or Lebanon. And as you probably already know, in the aftermath of the genocide, Christian agencies collected Armenian girls and women, and their needlework was sold overseas to support those rescue and relief operations. The stitch border, I am told, reads, "Long live America." This is a purse, very delicately knitted, typically worn by women around their waists. The note that was attached to it when I inherited it stated that it was made from homegrown, hand-spun, and hand-dyed silk. And we did see a lot of mulberry trees in the Harpert area, which is what, of course, silkworms need to survive. The fact that my foremothers carefully protected their handwork and passed them to my grandmother for safekeeping underscores the importance that they placed on textiles as holders of personal memory and cultural histories. The makers of these oldest pieces are unknown. I don't have any information about where they were made or who made them or when they were made. But others were made by my grandmother, great-grandmothers, aunts, and uncles, many of whom were survivors. This photo, which is one of the oldest in our family collection, hung in my mother's wall for many years. As a child, I pored over their faces that seemed to predict the massacres that happened only 2 years later. My great-grandmother, Elizabeth Ashodian Magarian, standing on the very far left, survived with only one infant, who you see here seated on her mother's lap. Elizabeth and her son, Nushan, shared a saber scar that slashed my great-grandmother's arm and Nushan's back as she held him in her arms. But according to family stories, her mother, husband, sister-in-law, firstborn daughter, Elizabeth Violet, were murdered. We're unsure of what happened specifically, what their fates were, because my great-grandmother never spoke about it. Like so many other communities subjected to attempted annihilation, they were traumatized in silence. When I began this archival project, my mother was 89 and the last of our family who knew the survivors of the genocide. I knew it was time to speak with her and collect whatever she knew of their stories. I kept asking my mother, why didn't you ask what happened to your grandmother? What did she go through? My mother's answer was always the same. No one spoke, no one asked. Silence ruled my great-grandmother's household. And you see her here sitting in the middle. This is when she was a farm woman in California growing grapes, and her husband next to her, her son Nushan, with his hands crossed, the baby who survived, and her 4 other sons who she gave birth to in the United States. The one on the right is my grandfather. I was terribly sad to not know the history of my family. It really haunted me. So every morning for 3 years, I read accounts of the massacres and the genocide, and I kept trying to put together what must have happened to them. What was the likely scenario that they lived through? The horrible details haunted me in the nights. I also did extensive online research in genealogical databases, which included ship manifests, birth and death certificates, naturalization papers, census records, marriage certificates, and burial documentation. I talked to elder relatives and joined a group in the US, the Armenian Genealogy Group. They were extremely helpful in finding certain facts for me, for locating ship manifests that I couldn't necessarily understand. I was even given some information from an 1840 census and got a couple of names of my Magarian relatives, only men, because the women were never listed in those census. I was really jealous, I have to admit, of families whose survivors had written down their stories that talked freely about what happened to them. But then I began to realize that the needlework that I inherited held the stories and the memories of the women who made them. Those textiles began to whisper to me. After Armenian populations scattered, women continued to practice their handwork as a means of proclaiming their ethnic identity in the wake of ethnic violence, to preserve cultural through lines between the homeland and the diaspora, and to recreate a sense of home within the refugee experience of homelessness. I had to be very still and listen carefully between the lines, between the threads. I began mapping the textiles to individuals on the family tree, a document my mother had created in the 1970s based on oral histories collected from survivors. I was able to match photographs, bits of information from official records, and bits of information from my grandmother's scraps and notes, and the textiles themselves to 8 women on the family tree, and you can see I sort of mapped it out here. What I discovered was a network of materiality, a network that held these women together as family and held them in their Armenian identity even when they were in exile. My grandmother was the designated keeper, and now I have inherited her role as family archivist. My grandmother wrote down the makers' names on some pieces, but others remain a mystery. Tucked into the folds of this bright pink cloak and silk headscarf, I found a photo of an unidentified woman dressed in the very same outfit. These stunning pieces were originally in the collection of my aunt Armoral Manavian Magarian, and were passed to me through my grandmother, but there's no name, no date, and no location attached to the pieces. I was very curious about it, as you can imagine. Nobody recognized her photo. I asked as many people as I could in my family. Eventually, I co-authored a short article based on research that a colleague and I conducted, trying to find out information about this mysterious figure. Rehan Minsky, an Armenian photographer and artist who grew up here in Istanbul, searched multiple photo databases, trying to pinpoint the studio where this photo was taken. Unfortunately, she was unable to really figure that out, but she concluded that the photo was probably taken in an urban area around 1890. My assignment was to research the costume, which at first glance appears to identify the figure as a cosmopolitan Turkish woman. But after careful research, I found 2 illustrations of Armenian-identified women in similar outfits. These illustrations were commonplace in the 19th century. There were many taxonomies designed to classify racial, ethnic, and religious types. And here you see 2 that are typed as Armenians. Given the social position of Armenians living in the political instability of the late Ottoman Empire, ethnic cross-dressing might have been cautious, might have been prudent, especially for women, Armenian women, in the public sphere. But it remains a mystery. My grandmother's textile collection includes pieces spectacular like these, but also very much everyday kinds of textiles that people used in their daily lives. There were a wide range of techniques, including knitting, crocheting, tatting, bobbin lace, draw work, cut work, and embroidery. But most importantly, the collection includes Armenian needle lace, a complex form of knotted lace making indigenous to the Eastern Mediterranean and Southwest Asian regions. It was made by Armenian women and their Turkish counterparts, their Greek counterparts, and Palestinian counterparts. This is a child's apron with needle lace trim that my grandmother made in around 1916 at the age of 7 or 8. It puts my work to shame. Perhaps the most precious pieces are a series of 4 needle lace trimmed collars sent to my grandmother by her first cousin, Satanig Chaporian. Years ago, I found 3 knotted in a handkerchief with a note in my grandmother's handwriting describing how she got them. They were from her cousin, Satanig Chaporian, who you see here, this young woman. These are photos from the Euphrates College yearbook in Harpert, where she had been a student. And on the right, you see her on the very, very far right, standing. And this is a photo that I was given by a distant Chaporian cousin who I connected to only recently, but he sent me this photo when he realized I was trying to find information about Satanig. So she graduated in 1913, and shortly before she died on the death march to Aleppo in 1915, she cut the collars from her clothes and sent them to her young cousin, my grandmother, in Fresno, California. So recently, I discovered the 4th collar. Stitched to it was a piece of paper you can see here, penciled with a quick signature and inscription. This belongs to Sarah. That's my grandmother. Little did Satanig know, she could not even imagine, that her stitched collars would come to rest in my hands decades later. And these are the pieces even though they're not spectacular, they're not museum quality. These are the pieces that if there's a fire in my house, I run to get. Perhaps in response to these very ghostly gifts, my grandmother stitched needle lace every evening throughout her life, working wordlessly with her head bowed. I remember her sitting, the TV was on, she was stitching. Her posture was benign. It looked friendly and easy, but her silent work should not be dismissed as inconsequential. Textiles are in our lives every day. They're disguised as merely decorative. But behind the gendered notion that female-identified work is barren of content, stitching can be a formidable act. Needlework in general, and needle lace in particular, was practiced as a domestic genre by Armenian women living within a patriarchal society of the Ottoman Empire and later in the diaspora. Women valued lace making as one of the few forms of expression open to them and passed their skills from mother to daughter in a generational line of succession. Historically, these lineages were continuous, but they became discontinuous in the post-genocide Armenian American cultural landscape. In the United States, social and economic mechanisms disrupted the transmission of skill. Reasons included things that I support. For instance, universal education of girls, the affordability of mass-produced substitutes, increased employment opportunities for women, and most importantly, perhaps, a declining identification with Armenian culture and identity under the pressures of assimilationism. My family was very proud to become American. Sadly, the tradition faltered in my mother's generation. She expressed her creative talents in the Western genre of oil painting. But when I was 19, my grandmother taught me the basic stitch. We were standing in her kitchen in Fresno when my grandfather, a mechanical engineer and a graduate of MIT, very fancy engineering school in the United States, passed behind us and commented very casually, "I could design a machine to make that faster and better." Not just faster, he said, but better. He was wrong. Only a poor imitation of the knotted technique could be mass-produced. But it was a moment that was pivotal in my life. It was a call to arms, though I didn't realize it at the time. Thread work became my lifelong academic focus and creative medium. So he was dismissing us, but it gave me fire. My grandmother's body of work is a testament to her perseverance. For her, it became an unspoken work of silent memory and mourning. Textiles are mnemonic. They communicate viscerally in our bodies. When speaking loss is unthinkable and hearing trauma is unbearable, one can still stitch. As my grandmother aged, she continued making lace. But before her death, her stitches became uneven and her pieces became increasingly small. But I inherited more than 100 of these small medallions that she started and finished and started and finished and started and finished. She didn't waver in her mission to materialize the memories of a homeland she had never set foot on. For me, working with these heirlooms has been an act of memory restoration, producing a kind of shadowy memory of discontinuous facts stitched together with a continuous thread. This work can be contextualized within the post-memory theories of scholar Marianne Hirsch, who writes that, quotes, "The break in transmission resulting from traumatic historical events necessitates forms of remembrance that reconnect and re-embody an intergenerational memorial fabric that is severed by catastrophe. And indeed, the memorial fabric is not simply a metaphor. For 100 years and more, my family's stories of violence, deportation, and exile were held in silence. But night after night, women stitch their memories in thread. And it is my responsibility to pay homage to their unacknowledged work of memory and mourning. Unfortunately, my skill was rudimentary when my grandmother passed, and it still is. But as I inventoried the dozens of doilies she had made, a mission came into view very slowly to study this art form that acted as a cultural through line between the homeland and the diaspora. I resolved to become, like my grandmother, a carrier of intangible cultural heritage. I could teach myself using instructional books and YouTube videos. They exist. But the intimacy of face-to-face and hand-to-hand transfer of knowledge felt very important to me. UNESCO states that an important strategy in safeguarding intangible cultural heritage is to encourage artisans to continue to produce the craft, but also to pass along their skills to others, particularly within their own communities. I could teach myself using, I'm sorry, I should have had that going while I was talking. This is Satanig, let me start again. To that end, I searched for an elder to teach me. I contacted several local Armenian churches and organizations and reached out through Armenian Facebook pages, but I was repeatedly told that no one was left in the United States who knew how to do this. But after writing a letter to the editor in an online Armenian newspaper in the United States, I found two practitioners. The first was Azadig Bedanian, who you see here teaching me. Azadig immigrated to the United States from Anjar in the 1960s, and I've been visiting her now for several years. She continues to talk to me about her heritage, how she grew up in Anjar. It's almost like listening to how my great-grandparents might have lived. The second teacher I found was the late Susan Lynn Sinanian. She was the textile curator at the Armenian Museum of America in Watertown, Massachusetts. I spent several days with her in 2019, and I was able to study some of the amazing pieces at the museum's extensive needlework collection. Also in 2019, I traveled to the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem in search of practitioners and teachers. At the Armenian Patriarchate, the welcoming Father Gurian informed me that the celebrated church treasury, and they have books that show their incredible collection, holds woven, printed, and embroidered liturgical textiles, but no lacework. Lacework, he told me, was crafted by the Armenian nuns for their upkeep at the no longer inhabited St. James convent. And I'll just take a moment to show you this very large printed textile. It was dated 1789, and it was a gift from a wealthy Armenian family in Madras, India, to the church in Jerusalem. It was an amazing piece. Nothing to do with needle lace, but incredible. While I was in Jerusalem, I also met with an Armenian family of needleworkers, the Sandrunis. Their grandfather had come as one of the 2,000 orphan refugees who streamed into the Armenian Quarter after the genocide. They proudly showed me their heirloom laces, but in the end, they insisted that there was no one with needle lace skills that still lived in the quarter. On that trip, I also visited the women's cooperative Nasi Jonah in Nazareth. Little has been written about the history of Nazarene needle lace, but Armenian and Palestinian women in Nazareth share the exact same stitch. The tradition was on the verge of extinction there in Nazareth, only practiced by two elder Palestinian women. when pharmacist Violette Khoury founded the organization several years ago. I spoke with Palestinian and Armenian women who are spearheading the revival of the craft there. I was shown family collections by Armenian members of the cooperative. This is a young Palestinian woman. She's a lace maker. She has a shop there. And she was extremely quick and adept at doing what she did. I brought a smallish doily for about $40 US. She was lovely. In 2023, I came to Istanbul. I had made contact with Zeynep here at the foundation through mutual friends, and I was pleased to come to the foundation and meet people here. Talin and Zeynep continue to be incredibly generous in helping me in general, but they also helped me locate 2 Armenian needle lace makers here in Istanbul, and this was an incredible find for me. The first one you see here, this is Mari, and she works, her needle lace is something spectacular, far exceeding what my grandmother could do. And I realized that my grandmother was far from the tradition. She had learned from her mother, but her mother died when she was 12. And so she did it very simply. She did it almost like in a childlike way all her life. And she didn't have the information or the support of a community to really, take her art form to another level. But when I saw these pieces, I was completely astounded. Huge and perfect and beautiful and designed incredibly. Unfortunately, in speaking with a lot of these women, what I hear is a very common concern that their descendants don't necessarily show a lot of interest in their family collections, in their work or their grandmother's work or their great-grandmother's work. And sometimes they wonder, what will become of these pieces that are now often considered old-fashioned by young people. That's the pejorative that I hear most often to describe needle lace. Oh, it's old-fashioned, it's not something I want to put in my home. I hear that over and over and over again. But I'm happy to report that even having conversations about needle lace it helps. It's encouraging interest in these objects, which are very humble. They're humble objects. They're domestic objects. And they sometimes appear to have little purpose or value in contemporary domestic or creative contexts. Mari's work is absolutely exceptional. She's originally from Hatay area, which is known to have a very strong needle lace practice there. People are still doing the work. The second woman that I met here, I saw her yesterday with Ezgi, is Zadeh. I'm probably saying that wrong. Also from Hatay, likewise an amazing needle lace maker. This is a table runner that she made for her granddaughter Thais. The only way she could show it is to hold it up against her body. Fortunately, Thais really appreciates her grandmother's work. And my conversations with these practitioners have often been very boisterous, with a lot of excitement and laughter and people talking over each other, but also moments of sorrow. We locate ourselves by our villages, and we share painful stories of our ancestors over Armenian coffee. Often we cry as we look at each other with a quiet sense of recognition. It's a wordless communication between women with no shared language because they're not speaking English and I'm not speaking Turkish or Armenian. Needle lace becomes our lingua franca. For me, there's both longing and relief in these encounters, longing for a sense of belonging and relief as I find solidarity in the needle lace threads that wrap us together. The work itself asserts its authority. We put our heads down and we look at the work and we talk about the designs and how beautifully they're made. And the thread itself becomes memory. The doilies become testimonial objects. Poignant stories come forward. And these are the moments that make these things magical. One such moment was with Zeynep from the foundation here. Unfortunately, she had a death in her family and is unable to come tonight. On my first trip to Istanbul, we were traveling on a ferry, crossing the Bosphorus from the European to the Asian side. It was raining very heavily, and we were sitting inside, and we were soaked. It was so wet. Zeynep pulled out two beautiful, fragile Armenian needle lace pieces. One of them is here. And she told me that they were made by an Armenian woman who was saved from the genocide by her grandfather, and this woman had lived in their household. Quietly and unexpectedly, Zeynep handed me the pieces and said, "They're for you to keep. You will take care of them." This has become one of the unexpected outcomes of the conversations that I'm having with people. Women have begun handing me pieces for safekeeping. But my hope is that families will treasure their heirlooms and keep them safe in their families for generations to come. Recently, I met a woman, youngish woman, Elis Yusufian in Berkeley, California. She's an Armenian American PhD student, and she's writing her dissertation on the subject of Armenian needle lace. We immediately recognized our common mission and have become close friends and colleagues. We took a trip that we laughingly call our Armenian needle lace road trip to see an exhibition curated by Gasia Armenian at the Fowler Museum at the University of California in Los Angeles. And I believe that this is the first and probably the only exhibition of a single needle lace artist. The work was all of the woman Marie Pilubosyan, and she was a genocide survivor. She immigrated to Los Angeles. She became a social worker working with genocide survivors, and she donated her work to the Fowler Museum in the 1980s, but it had never been shown. But suddenly, there feels like there's a kind of resurgence of interest in Armenian needle lace, and this is a perfect example of how people are beginning to take note of this tradition. The following year, I published a review of the exhibition, and it in the peer-reviewed journal, Textile Journal of Cloth and Culture, which is good because they have, in all of their articles for the last 25 years, there's nothing written about Armenian needle lace. And one of my goals is to really write a full article about Armenian needle lace and its place in our culture. So Elise and I are currently developing a website called the Armenian Needle Lace Initiative. We've been working on it for a year, and we'll be launching it soon, I hope. Hopefully in January. Our mission is to engage a global network of Armenian needle lace practitioners, researchers, curators, collectors, and enthusiasts. So many Armenian families have collections. And so, I'm really eager to get people to take them out and look at them and really reevaluate their worth. The website will include general information about Armenian needle lace, a portfolio of makers, a portfolio of private collections, personal stories, poetry having to do with needle and thread, lists of references, public collections, instructional videos, and importantly, information about how to identify and care for needle lace. The portfolio of Armenian needle lace makers is purposefully designed to showcase the creative talents and technical know-how of individual artists from around the world, including Turkey, Armenia, and the United States, and more. The portfolio literally counters the notion that needle lace practitioners have all passed on, that ancestral knowledge is lost, and that the genre no longer is relevant as a cultural or creative expression. We highlight both artists who learned in a traditional way from family members, but also younger people who are beginning to learn in untraditional ways. There's a small group of young Armenian Americans who are mostly self-taught, and for them, working with this tradition, with this genre, is really reviving their history, and it's an act of cultural continuity. It's very much that. It's less a creative expression and more a cultural expression of defiance and reclamation. We're also building a portfolio of private collections. Taleen's mother, I'm not sure if you're here, hi, was kind enough to allow me to photograph their family collection. We spent, I don't know, a few minutes this afternoon photographing your family's work. And we're going to be very pleased and proud to be able to show it on our website, so thank you very much. I believe this is the only website of its kind anywhere. Unless we've missed something and we've done some research, there is nothing online. And we're really hoping that this can become sort of a nexus of information. So in response to my family archive, the information I collected from my family history and the research I've conducted on Armenian needle lace, I began making my own work, a kind of collaboration with my ancestors, a creative call and response with my foremothers. I'm an experienced weaver and crocheter, but needle lace is a whole other thing. It's incredibly complex, requiring dexterity, experience, and strength. And because each stitch is not knotted, it's not easily corrected if a mistake is made. But instead of traditional patterns, mountains, honeycombs, seeds, my attention has been drawn to gesture and material. This piece was an exercise in memory. There's no objective, no pattern. It's entitled 10,000 Stitches, and I counted. It has no meaning other than the repetition of movement. It's a meditation that brought unspoken memories to me. It became a statement of resilience and reclamation. Returning to a technique that I'm much more skilled in, I'm currently working on a crocheted tablecloth measuring approximately 130 by 130 centimeters. When complete, it will narrate Satanig Chapurian's story. It will be called On the Way to Aleppo. The text, crocheted, literally crocheted, is a loose translation from my grandmother's notes about Satanig's collars. To begin the project, I traveled to a cemetery in Providence, Rhode Island, where Satanig's mother, Anna Chapurian, is buried. Anna survived the death march, but lost her daughter, Satanig, along the way. I sat against Anna's headstone and worked the first lines of the crochet stitch. And then on my travels to Istanbul, I brought the piece to work on. It felt a little subversive to quietly crochet Satanig's story in public. I've also been working on a small series of crocheted objects reproduced from selected pieces in my family's collection. Each doily crocheted in cotton thread is basically a facsimile of a family heirloom made by my grandmother, great-grandmothers, or great-aunts. In making the doily on the left, crocheted by my great-grandmother, Elizabeth, I traced her every movement. I used a magnifying glass to analyze every stitch, how she solved particular technical problems, and built the design stitch by stitch. But even though my hands faithfully followed her movements, the results were distinctive in size and density. But it didn't matter. The visual outcome was less important to me than the visceral process that allowed me to recognize her thoughts of a woman that I had never met. I've also started weaving shrouds. They are very unassuming visually. They might as well be manufactured in a factory. You could go and buy, a meter for $25 in the United States. But the point of the project is process, not product. The use of linen itself is a citation from the homeland, from here, because flax is indigenous to this region. The first shroud to come off my loom was woven for my mother. I brought it to her before her death. She fingered the cloth and declared her approval. And when she died 4 years ago on April 24th, I draped the linen over her body as she lay in a simple coffin, wood coffin made for her at her request by her brother. As a part of this weaving project, I started to research flax and linen. And I was asked by Glenn Adamson, a craft historian, to write an essay for his online publication, Material Intelligence. I started to really dig down into the history of flax in this area through the Middle East and into Egypt. And what was really interesting is that it was considered to be clean as opposed to wool. And so it was used to clothe sacred spaces and to wrap corpses. So after weaving my mother's shroud, I began weaving a shroud for the woman standing on the far right of this family photo. She was my great-grandmother's sister-in-law and was said to have died in the 1895 massacres. I was tormented by the fact that we didn't know her fate and we didn't even know her name. But miraculously, I finally found her name and the location of her body. Apparently, family narrative is not always accurate. My great aunt survived the massacres, traveled to New York City with my great-grandmother to join her husband, who you see here, Balthazar Ashodian. He had immigrated to America in 1884 and was a rug weaver, a fact which was really fun to learn because I'm a weaver, and I never knew that. But less than a year after her arrival, she died in an apartment 3 days after giving birth to her baby girl, and she was buried in the Cedar Grove Cemetery in Queens. Her baby daughter, sadly, died 10 months later of malnutrition and was buried right above her mother in an unmarked grave. So she made it out safely, only to die in childbirth. Both she and her daughter were named Elizabeth, like my mother and my great-grandmother. In the fall of 2023, I traveled to Queens, New York. Using the cemetery's GPS function, I located the exact spot where she and her baby were buried. We were doing this, trying to find, is it here, is it here, is it here? Then I proceeded to lay out 2 shrouds, one adult and one infant-sized. I left the shrouds with offerings of pomegranates, persimmons, and herbs from my daughter's medicinal garden known to help heal grief, hawthorn and violet. The lengthy process of weaving these shrouds led me to write an article, and it basically explores the rhythmic repetitions that run through weaving, through dance, music, poetry, and prayer, and how the experience of weaving hour after hour, and it can be very boring, can lead one towards a sensory experience of the sacred. I wrote another essay entitled Thread Memory that will be published shortly by the foundation here, both in Turkish and English. In the essay, I propose the concept of thread memory. From my mentor, Native American basket weaver Julia Parker, I've learned that truth does not lie in factual absolutes, but in underlying currents of meaning. Thread memory flows along this current. Thread memory is pliable, spun from minute tufts of recollection and stitched from fraying remnants of traumatic memories. My family never spoke, but the textiles they made form a body of memory that, if I listen carefully, can whisper my way home. Another project I'm working on is to spin a length of thread, linen thread, that could be strung between the old country and the new country. According to Google, this is 11,333 miles. So like Ariadne's thread that Jason used to find his way out of the labyrinth, this thread I have followed home. I went to my home villages to honor my ancestors, to honor the strength they had to survive, to travel in hardship for months, and to settle in a new land. I wanted to remember them, and I wanted them to remember me. I wanted to thank them for my existence. I want to thank Zeynep Tashkin, who is not here. From our first meeting, she encouraged me, she helped me make arrangements, she connected me to the right people, she oversaw logistics, and most importantly, she made me feel safe. And I want to thank Eski, who's here today, an artist and filmmaker who I connected with when I went to see her heartbreaking film, Elizabeth, and if you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. On this trip, Eski filmed and took photos, some of which I'm showing you today, and I'm hoping to make a film essay of this whole process. I plan to go back again. So since I first unpacked my grandmother's collection in 2018, I studied maps. I wanted to understand where my ancestors might have lived. I wanted to imagine the streets they walked on, the houses they lived in, the churches they attended. But because my family kept the code of silence, I had no information. I also pored over images online, both historic and contemporary, trying to understand the terrain, to understand where the villages were that my 4 grandparents came from. And you can see not much is left. Things have been destroyed. I'm the first in my family in 3 generations to step on ancestral land. I believe previous generations found the idea of returning too painful and too frightening. In fact, one of my elderly uncles insisted just last month that I abandon my plans. His fear was overwhelming. But it didn't stop me. So after years of preparing, I suddenly found myself standing on the land, seeing with my own eyes the hills, the gorges that lead from Sinamud down to Husenik, just as my grandmother must have seen it, just as she must have walked. So the buildings you can see have been leveled to the ground. According to some accounts, destruction began obviously during the genocide and then was completed in the 1960s. I timed my trip to fall on the 130th anniversary of the first day of the massacres, November 10th, 1895. If it wasn't enough to come and be in this place that feels sad, I wanted to come and commemorate that 130th anniversary. On that day, I felt the breeze on my face. I breathed the warm air. I touched the dry dirt. I saw with my eyes what my ancestors saw with theirs. I saw with my eyes what they must have remembered in sorrow, what they perhaps remembered with longing. We walked through what is left of Sinamud, the neighborhood of Harpert, where my great-grandmother Elizabeth lived. There's one single identifiable building, Surp Garabed. Elizabeth eventually converted to Protestantism under the influence of the missionaries who came to Harpert in the mid-19th century. But her grandfather had been a priest in the Armenian Apostolic Church, and he very well might have been a priest in this church. So I felt their presence there. This is a picture of my great-great-great-grandfather, Mardis Ashodian. I really have no words. This is all very new. It's all very raw. It was both terrible and tender. I sat in the rubble of Surp Garabed. I felt my ancestors waiting for me in the stones. From the perspective of 100 years and more than 11,000 kilometers, it feels like I traveled back in time. It's impossible to go back. We can't reverse time. We can't reverse trauma. But I found something else there that was unexpected. I found memory. I found things that felt strangely familiar. I kept telling Eski and Zeynep, oh, my grandmother did that. Oh, my grandmother said that. I mean, it was this constant refrain of recollection. I thought about my great-grandmother, Elizabeth. I imagined how she must have felt to give birth to 4 sons in the United States with her second husband. I thought about how she must have felt to hold her first grandchild, this little girl, my mother Elizabeth, her namesake, after losing her daughter Elizabeth Violet 35 years earlier. After soup got to bed, we walked to the area overlooking where the Euphrates College had been. I sat down and crocheted on Satinig's crochet her story. It was a spot that surely she had walked on before she died on the death march to Aleppo. The next day we went to Husenig, the home village of my great-grandfather, Hamporsum Sohigian. It was a completely different experience. Fortunately, some of the homes there are protected as being historical sites, and I was able to walk along streets that surely he walked on. It was much more visible, much more palpable. Hamporsum left in 1889, traveled to his uncles in Damascus, then to Alexandria, Marseille, to New York City, Boston, Chicago, and eventually California. And you see him standing here above his 2 uncles. Eventually, he and his family went to the farmland in California. You see them here also. This is my grandmother seated with a baby on her lap. This is my grandmother, the little girl right in front of her, and that's my great-grandfather. And the gentleman standing behind is someone that I knew growing up. He was called Uncle. He was the patriarch of the family. That's my great-grandmother's brother. So as a 4th generation, half Armenian woman growing up in the diaspora, much of my culture was lost to me. I grew up cooking and eating Armenian food, but I wasn't taught my native language, even though my grandmother was both fluent and literate, and my mother spoke Armenian with her grandmother. But language isn't the only indicator of identity. Cultural threads remain intact in unexpected ways. The experience of being there in Husenik is it was literally this deep sense of familiarity. When I entered this lovely woman's home, please say her name. Sad. Thank you. I sobbed as he watched me. I turned my back and I started to sob. But what I was crying for was not for what was lost, but for what I remembered. It was like my body remembered. Crocheting my grandmother's doily laces, tending to my grandmother's tomatoes and pepper plants, drying myself with my grandmother's crackly, sweet-smelling, sun-dried towels, stepping over my grandmother's worn black shoes that she always left at the back door. These are not normal things for Americans. I expected to be overwhelmed by the intergenerational trauma that has plagued my family for 4 generations. And yes, I felt the pain, I felt the sorrow. But unexpectedly, I also found intergenerational memory. The memories are a little dusty, they're a little muddy, certainly torn with trauma. But like the rug in the dirt here, the patterns are recognizable and they're reweavable. Tomorrow I go home to California, where my ancestors found solace. And there I will weave. There I will stitch. Thank you.
This is a beautiful image to end with. And you are a great storyteller. Thank you very much. Touched our hearts and souls. Shall we turn to the audience? Maybe some questions might arise. Yes. Is there anyone who wants to ask anything to Deborah? Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a bit my throat is so. Oh, that might help. Yes, sorry about my voice. Getting better. Thank you very much, first of all, for all the very interesting detail. It must have been so much work to do all the research and collect everything. So
it's been
kudos
years
on that. I was wondering now, from your present point, what do you feel as? I mean, culturally, national. How did you identify yourself as? Are you an American? Or would you say, if I had known all these details so many decades earlier, I might have a different identity? So how do you how is your identity before the research and after the research?
My mother grew up in Fresno. There was a large Armenian community there. You would think that that would make her feel comfortable and at home. But no, the racism is so strong, or was so strong, that she was bullied. She was called a dirty Armenian. My family couldn't move into a certain area. It was illegal for people from the Ottoman Empire to live there. So she grew up with a mixed feeling about being Armenian. It was painful. My uncle even said, her brother said he wished that he didn't have a Armenian name in Fresno, because everybody knew what that was there. I, on the other hand, grew up in a town where there were almost no Armenians, and the only thing anybody could relate to was Cher, right, who's half Armenian also. And everybody always said I looked like her. So in some ways, I always knew it. You know, the photograph was on the wall forever. I knew about the genocide. But again, nobody talked about it. What I knew about my culture was food, of course. That's the last thing that we give up. But there was also this feeling in my family, because I was half Armenian, that I was a little bit of an outsider. And, you know, that was a little hard. I think I understand more now what it means to be Armenian. Even though I always have identified with it, now it's much more clear to me what the history is, It is also interesting that my colleague Elise, who we're working on the website together, she grew up in a full Armenian household. She's not 4 generations down, she's only 2 generations down. She is more Armenian than I am. And I see that, I feel that, I compare myself culturally to her. She spent time in Armenia, she speaks Western Armenian, she's much better at the needle lace than I am. All of those things. So it's a mix. And my other side, my father's side, is Scottish, Irish, you know, and British Isles. So I have that identity too, even though that's much further away. It's more like 10 generations in America. So it's complicated. I mean, most Americans, we call ourselves mutts because we're all mixed. So that's not unfamiliar to be American in that way. I'm happy to have it. A lot of Americans think they don't have culture. Sometimes my students, you know, I would give them an assignment, well, what is your culture? And they would say, I don't have a culture. And I would say, what are you talking about? There is no such thing. Just because you can't see it, all you have to do is leave the country and people recognize you as American, whatever that means to you, you know. Yeah.
If you travel in Europe and someone asks, oh, where are you from? What's your short version?
Yeah, my short version is San Francisco, California.
No country.
Considering what's happening, need I say more? No.
Thank you so much for this incredible presentation, and it will really stay with me for a long time, and I'll be ruminating on it for a long time. I was wondering if there was any actual relationship between Armenian, whatever that phrase might be, between Armenian lacework and the Khachkar stones, because this is something I've lived in Armenia, and it was, as a obvious outsider being there, whenever I would be somewhere where there would be Khachkars, invariably someone would come and then explain that there's a direct relationship between the Khachkars and the lace. And so I was just wondering if that's a material thing, whether that's more of a, I don't know, like a metaphorical thing. But just seeing your pictures made me think of these conversations I had. Thank you.
One of the very early articles that I published was on literally the sort of migration of textile patterns to other media. So we were talking about that and looking at the tile work, the Islamic tile work. I, as a textile person, I believe strongly that the lace work comes first because it's natural to the material and the technique. And then it is literally migrated to a different medium, in this case, stone. But there are other examples, Irish stonework, they have crosses and other kind, all of that, any kind of interlacing, those are textiles. They're just textiles in stone or textiles in ceramics or textiles in tile work. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's more than we can take now with the time that we have, but there's definitely a relationship, but it goes in one direction, from textiles to stonework. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you very much. It's been really touching listening to you. Why do you think some people follow traces of things? Traces.
Oh.
I'm going to make an assumption. I'm sure there are people in your family who wouldn't even think about. So what's separated you, or what separates some people to do something like that? What is it that you think?
I don't know. It's a really good question. I feel like I was born a preservationist and born an archivist. I've always been interested in history. Some people push forward and see into the future. They're futurists. I mean, there's even a movement, which I don't really understand very well, in the United States, Armenian futurists. I don't relate to that. For me, the past is what counts. But I don't know how to explain that other than it was just born to me. Mm-hmm. And it didn't come to me when I was 20. I could kick myself for not talking to my grandmother when she was alive. You understand? Yeah. And I think that we have that, a lot of us have that feeling. But I don't know the answer. Do you have an answer?
No, I've been asking myself the same thing these days, thinking about this. What is it that some people do?
Yes, it's true.
Something existential, I guess, or spiritual.
Yes, yes, it feels spiritual to me. Absolutely. And my daughter is very spiritual, but she's focused forward. And so I hold this. I mean, she appreciates, we have been texting nonstop. She's 37, she's an adult. But we have, we've been sharing everything. But she was born differently.
Thank you.
I don't know.
First of all, I would like to thank you for your presentation. I was very much touched. And my question is, I tried to follow visually your presentation through the photographs, starting from the black and white as representations of memory, and you ended up with, you ended your presentation with modern pictures, colorful pictures. And I realized the bodily posture and facial expression of the woman in the last picture looked very much like one of your ancestors. And have you realized the same thing? Or I might be wrong, but I'm just questioning myself. There's this continuity. Is there a continuity in the memory, like memory making process? So how would you? I'm not sure I'm clear about this because I'm still thinking. But my question is it's about the photographs, actually.
The woman in
Yes.
the turquoise house.
In Turkey, yes.
Yeah. She was amazing. She invited us in. In the United States, I'm considered short. I towered over her. My mother always talked about how small her grandmother was. But she was amazing. We held hands immediately. We couldn't speak to each other. And I felt like I had been in her home before. That's what it felt like. I mean, she had this stack, we talked about it, this stack of quilts, handmade quilts, or I guess they're mattresses or quilts, and they were covered for winter. And my grandmother made those. Everything about her home was familiar to me. And I don't know how to explain that, whether it's this kind of cultural memory, ancestral memory, but I know it's, I don't really understand the politics of this place very well, but what I perceive is this separation between Kurds and Turks and Armenians and, the ethnic differences that I have I'm familiar with in the United States, but it doesn't feel that different to me from the outside. It feels like there's a shared culture, even though there was, terrible histories between people. Say? Just because the idea of a kind of shared experience as women, that was obviously, all of my work is about women and their work and their experiences, so that was just an immediate connection, and I thought of, are her children taking care of her, and I took care of my mother, and, all of the kind of womanly concerns. Yes.
Thank you so much for this very moving and powerful presentation. I have two questions, so I'll ask the first one first and then maybe second one later. At some point you said your grandmother's lace work was far from the tradition, and I was wondering if there is a single tradition or not.
The technique itself is, there's and there's a basic knot and a few variations. The styles between Turks and Armenians is different. What I meant to say about my grandmother's work is that it wasn't very sophisticated, that it was maybe someone who's very experienced, like the two ladies here in Istanbul, maybe something they would have done in their teen years. And it got less and less skillful as she aged, which is natural, of course. It was very traditional in style, though. It follows, every piece that I see, I think of my grandmother, and even one of the books, the instructional books that I have the pattern that she did over and over and over again. I forget what it's called right now, but it's a traditional pattern, and she must have learned that from her mother and then didn't really learn anything else. Maybe didn't have anybody else to instruct her. Maybe the instructional information was very limited for her. So it was a little bit, I always thought it was so amazing. and then when I saw the work of the ladies here, I was like, oh no.
Yeah. Just listening to your response, another question came to me, or maybe a point of clarification that I would ask. I guess she didn't have a community around her to share her lace work with, did she?
She had, there was a large family that was there, and actually in Fresno, where she lived, there were Harpatsi. Many came there. That was one of the places that they went. It was farmland that was very familiar. So she did have a community, but not all of them were experienced in needle lace. So, I remember her sister did not do it. Some of her auntie, I think she was one of the few women who actually continued to make the work. So she did not have the kind of support that would have helped her learn more patterns and get better at it. So yes.
Okay, my second question is, you kind of answered it, I think, but I would appreciate a clarification. The question was, what happens to the stories of the pieces of the laces? Which is, I think, you're addressing this in your work of your website, which is amazing, I think. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. But you shared with us really precious stories that are related to these precious pieces of lace work.
Yes.
And you connect them. So I'm wondering what, if that connection will somehow remain, or is there a way to keep those two connected? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's a really important question. Individual stories of experiences that I've had, some of the individual stories that I've shared with you and others that I have, some of those we will write and we will put on the website. And we're also hoping that other people that we don't know we're going to invite people to share their stories as well. But in the long run, I'm really hoping to take all of this material and the film, the video that Ezgi took, and photographs, and really, I don't know whether it's an exhibition or it's a book, but eventually, if I live long enough, I will be able to hold all of that and really capture this journey of mine, because it's an ancestral journey, but it's also a creative journey and a writing journey and a research journey. And my relatives are very, very supportive. They're not interested in coming, but they're so happy that I'm coming. I've been texting them and sending them photos, and my uncle makes tavli boards, out of wood, and I sent him all these designs that I saw, and he was, really thrilled to have those. So there's a kind of, even my non-relatives have been very supportive. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to pull it all together in something that will last. Thank you.
I remember someone saying he has heard that someone visited a lace factory or a workshop in the UK in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. Do you have any idea?
I'm afraid I don't, but I would like to know.
Well, no,
it would have to be a workshop doing it. I mean, there are lace factories, but it's manufactured and it's very different. But a workshop, yes. I mean, it could be. But I've never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Deborah, I would like to thank you for the kind of work you do, because I think it is really revaluing the kind of work and knowledge that these women had. I mean, besides honoring your ancestors,
Yes.
I mean, given the hierarchy of knowledge, and as you mentioned, the relative of yours saying the engineer, I think, was it your uncle?
Grandfather.
Your grandfather,
My grandfather.
Yes, of course, there are more efficient ways of doing this or that, but this is really a kind of knowledge that is undervalued, right? I mean, your work, I think, really revalues in a way.
That is the whole point.
Yeah. So I mean, when my aunts and great aunts passed away, the kind of needlework that they've produced, I mean, the men in my family weren't interested in it at all.
Exactly.
Because it's not, kind of knowledge or something, object that they are really interested in, and it's really devalued. And
Yes.
so
Devalued as decorative,
Yeah.
devalued as nothing special.
old-fashioned,
Old-fashioned,
yeah, woman's work
women's
and all
work, the
that,
whole
yeah.
thing. Yep.
And so I think your work has even, wider implications than your personal journey as well. So I would like to thank you for that.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I'll tell you, my entire career, I was a professor for 28 years. I was the chair of my textiles program in a fine arts college. The entire time, my mission, my struggle, my fight was to get the painters and the sculptors and the video artists to understand, acknowledge, value. That's what I did. That's what I did for 28 years, and I'm still doing it. So yes, thank you.
Wow. Yes, I also very much appreciate the embodied quality of your work,
Thank you.
because when you say responsive making, it's not reactive making. It's
Not reactive, no.
exactly, as opposed to reactive making. And maybe one last question as we close down, because when you sat down on the premises where your ancestors were, and you found yourself again working with your crochet, connecting with the land, with the memories. I also appreciated what you say about connecting with memories rather than pain. How did the quality of your crochet work was affected?
It was a mess.
It was a mess.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I wish I could say it wasn't, but it was.
Okay.
It was a mess, and I'm probably going to have to tear it out because I was completely overwhelmed.
Yes. That's another kind of language, I guess.
I guess it is.
Yes.
I hadn't thought about it. At first I thought, oh, I'm just failing, and then you put it in a different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Yes.
this last image, I
Yes.
think this is going to continue,
Yes.
never ending.
Never ending.
Post-memory work, as you said.
Yes.
In silent homes, there is nothing left to the women mostly to bring the stories together.
Yes.
And you are a great storyteller
Oh,
and
thank you.
weaver. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.